About a year ago, I was actually asked on another video if I would do kind of a winter bank fishing, cold water bank fishing, like breakdown of the baits that I like to use and the tackle that I like to use them, as well as where I like to fish it. So this video is going to be all that. I have 4 different rods and reels in front of me. These are the ones that honestly I have a ton of confidence in. Like when I go to a pond or I go fishing in the cold weather from the bank, these are the rods I'm going to use. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these I actually carry over into big lakes. Like if I go on a big lake, these are a lot of times the exact same baits that I'm going to throw as well. And so in this video, we're going to talk all about cold water fishing and just some of the baits that I really like. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Fin Fishing Apparel. And right now over at Fin Fishing, everything is still 20% off, including the USA made sun shirt, the new duck pants, the duck shorts, duck hats, bass hats, everything is 20% off, as well as every dollar that is spent right now over at Fin Fishing until the very end of the year, you get an entry into this contest where I'm giving away 10 different prizes, including a couple of different reels, a couple of different swim baits, a Humminbird Solix 12 unit, a fishing trip with myself, and a few other prizes. So I'm going to leave links down below in the description. Shopping at Fin Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, let's go ahead. Like I said, I've got 4 different rods right here with me. Literally just pulled these off the front deck of my boat. Like didn't even have to rig them, because the last time I went fishing in cold weather from the boat, I use these exact same baits. These are also the exact same baits I'm going to use in ponds. So anyways, let's go ahead and start with the one that I will probably pick up first when it comes to a lot of ponds, especially if you have like clear water ponds or clear water bodies of water that have a little bit of depth to them, and that is a jerkbait. A jerkbait, we all know how effective it is at catching bass in cold water. And I've talked a lot about the jerkbait over the last couple of months. You know, I've talked about it even when it comes to cold water fishing, how, you know, a lot of times nowadays I do not work a jerkbait as slow as I used to. And that's really just because with the advancements of technology, I've realized that you don't always need to fish a jerkbait slow. A lot of times you can fish it not necessarily super fast, but you can fish it faster than you would think, maybe only pausing it for a few seconds. And I truly believe as a bass fisherman that the more efficient you can be out there on the water, the more casts that you can make in the day, the more water that you can cover, the more opportunities you are giving yourself at catching more fish and bigger fish. And so one of the first baits that I'm going to pick up in a lot of different ponds or from the bank even is a jerkbait. Now the few jerkbaits that I like are probably the same jerkbaits that maybe you guys like. I really like a Berkeley Stunna, which is this bait right here. I fish this sucker everywhere. Like this has become probably my favorite all-time jerkbait. I also like a Vision 110, just like we have right here. These 2 baits, the Vision 110, this is the regular 110, this is the +1 Stunna. They pretty much dive the same depths when it comes to these 2 baits. The only difference is the +1 has a little bit bigger bill, which you would think would get it down a little bit deeper, but it is a little bit narrower of a bill, so it doesn't catch quite as much water, which doesn't bring it down in the water column as much. But this bait, the Stunna, has a slow sink to it, which the Vision 110 in cold water also has a little bit of a slow sink to it. It's a little bit more of a suspending bait. But these 2 baits are definitely my favorites when it comes to fishing. When it comes to ponds, I also really like this particular color of the Vision 110. It is a perch color. It is a matte perch color, and you can see the hook rash on this sucker. Like I use this thing all the time. I've used it in a lot of ponds. And look, most ponds don't have perch in them, but most ponds do have bluegill in them. And I like kind of like that goldish colored bait in, well, one, in cold water, but also if I know that I'm fishing around bass that are eating bluegill, because bluegill kind of have a goldish tint to them a lot of times. So anyways, those baits I love to fish. Again, clear water, a little bit of depth. You know, both of these baits are going to run probably about 6 to 7 foot depth. I say 5 to 7 foot. So you can keep them higher in the water column by kind of popping your rod tip up. So you can fish it in 3 and 4 foot of water, which look, in the wintertime, Like bass are fine being in fairly shallow water, even in a really cold water temperature, usually as long as there's just a little bit of depth close by. And so I do like to fish these baits a lot. It is a great way. A lot of times if I go to a bait, like if I go to a pond and I'm like, I'm just need to circle the pond once to try to catch the more active fish, a jerkbait is what I'm going to pick up. Now, when it comes to the rod, reel, and line setup with a jerkbait, I really keep things simple. 12-pound test, 10-pound test is pretty much what I stick with a lot of the times. Straight fluorocarbon for me when it comes to a jerkbait. This is my all-time favorite jerkbait rod. This is the ARC Tharp Series One-Eye Jack rod. So it's a 6-foot 9-inch rod. A lot of guys are going to pick this rod up and think that it is maybe a little bit too like whippy, like it has a lot of bend to it. But I like that because one, it's a very light rod. Two, when you're popping that thing all day long, because of how light it is, it's nice. It's also a little bit shorter, 6-foot 9-inch. But when you hook up with a fish, you know, I fish for a ton of smallmouth bass, and I've caught a ton of smallmouth bass on a jerkbait. And spots are the same way. Largemouth can be this way at times, but you know, you at times will get these fish, you hook them out at a distance, you get them all the way to the boat. A jerkbait, with it being a longer bait, it's a little bit easier for them to throw. So I already want a little bit more of that parabolic bend, but I really like that little bit more parabolic bending rod because when they get close to the boat, like I said, smallmouth spots, they dig really, really hard. And so I want something to be able to take up a lot of that power of that fish digging. And so this rod, I have caught fish all over the nation with it, from Lake Gunnersville. I fished in Florida. I've definitely caught fish. I was just trying to think if I was using ARC the last time I went to Florida, and I absolutely was. So Florida, all the way up here, New York, Michigan, all over the place. It's a really, really good rod. I like it a lot for jerk baits. As far as the reel goes, I like a 7.1 to 1 gear ratio for most of my jerkbait fishing. I stick with that. I don't think gear ratio matters as much for a jerkbait just because you are primarily just hitting, you're working the bait with the rod and not necessarily the reel itself. So it's not really going to impact the bait. It does impact the amount of like line that you need to pick that bait up. But a jerkbait is just a really good bait. We all know how good it is. I absolutely pick it up a lot in ponds. All right, let's go on to the next bait, which is it's another cold water staple for me. Again, warm water, cold water is a jig. And like I said, I had this jig already tied up. There is a change that I would make in this jig, which I didn't realize when I had picked up the rod itself. But a lot of times, and I'll go ahead and talk about the jig itself. A lot of times when I'm fishing a jig in cold water, I want a small profile jig. Like you can see, it's somewhat of a finesse jig, although this particular jig has a pretty beefy hook on it. But I like a lot of times a jig that's going to be a 3/8 ounce or less. When you're fishing in a lot of ponds, for example, or fishing from the bank, but especially in ponds, you will be dealing with silty bottoms. And the worst thing that you can do in a silty bottom environment is fish a bait that is too heavy, that gets down into that silt, because bass do not necessarily like to eat things off of the silt. They will eat things off of the silt if they're very long, like a finesse. One bait I've used a lot in cold water, but it's just in ponds in general, is like a shaky head. I use a really light shaky head, but a really long worm. Now, if that worm is 7 or 8 inches long, that bass has no problem grabbing the top of that tail and sucking it up and going, but they don't always like to actually eat the bait off of the bottom, especially when it's a compact bait like this when it comes to a jig. So a lot of times when they hit a jig in a pond, they actually hit it on the fall. So you'll actually pick the bait up, you'll let it fall, and that's when they're going to hit it, because they don't like to suck stuff off of a silty, mucky bottom. Bass just do not like to do that. They will do it from time to time. They just don't prefer to do it. So anyways, because I am hopping the bait a lot and letting it fall, I like a slower fall rate. I like something that, again, 3/8 ounce is about the max. A lot of times it's a 1/4 ounce bait. You know, little bitsy bug style baits. Any 1/4 ounce jig out there on the market can be a really, really good jig. I did notice which is the thing I didn't notice when I initially picked up this bait, because again, I just took it off the rod. But this particular bait has a zoom speed crawl on the end, which has these pinchers that flip and flop a lot. In cold water, I've talked about this a lot. I don't usually like the action of a bait that is like flipping and putting out a lot of vibration. In cold water, I prefer a chunk style bait. So just remember that. I really like just a Zoom Super Chunk. Junior's a great one. I mean, there's almost every brand out there has some sort of chunk. There's nothing really to it. It's a little chunk that you kind of hang the bait on, or hang the chunk on the jig, and then there's not a whole lot of action to the bait itself. Another thing that you can do with jigs is simply put something like a sweet beaver on the back. A sweet beaver is a bait that doesn't have a lot of action. Again, we do not want a ton of action in cold water because it's just a little bit unnatural to a bass. But I love fishing a jig. Now, when it comes to the setup of a jig, you can kind of be all over the place with this, if I'm being 100% honest with you. I typically like 15-pound fluorocarbon, 16-pound fluorocarbon with a lot of my jig fishing. At times in the winter, or at times when I'm using a really small jigs, I will step down to 12-pound fluorocarbon. So it becomes a feel with each individual jig when it comes to that. But I would say that 15 is a good all-around rate. That's also good in case you hook into like a 5, 6, 7-pounder in a little brush pile. You're going to be able to get them out, where with 12-pound, it's just a little bit light. So anyways, 15 pounds are really good all-around length to use, or not length, pound test to use. I like straight fluorocarbon. When it comes to the rod, this is where you can kind of go all over the place. Now, the last time that I used this specific setup, I was casting a jig a lot more. So I went with this rod, which is called my Offshore well, it's not mine. It's by ARC. It's a Tharp series. It's the Offshore Special. I use this for like hair jigs, big worms, football jigs, Texas rigs, Carolina rigs. Like, it's a very versatile rod. It's 7 foot 6 inches in length, so it's a little bit longer than a lot of rods. It worked out perfect for when I was using it the other day, because I was casting a jig and dragging it. This might be a little bit long in a pond, just because you're not always making long casts. Sometimes when you are fishing a pond, it is at times better to be a little bit, or even from the bank in general. I keep saying pond, but really what I mean is from the bank in general. But sometimes it's better to go with shorter rods, because it's just easier to manage when, like, you have a tree on this side of you and a tree on that side of you, and you're trying to make a little precise cast. At times, a shorter rod is just better for that situation. But anyways, anything from about 7 foot to 7 foot 6, medium heavy, and a fast action is what I'm going to like. This is a great rod, though. I use it for a ton of different techniques. As far as the reel goes, 8.1 to 1 gear ratio with this one. I want a fast-paced reel when it comes to a jig all the time. And again, I'm not using the reel to bring the line in. I am using the rod to work the bait, and then I'm simply picking up the slack with the reel. So in that situation, I like a fast-paced reel. As fast as you like would probably work. But that is my typical setup. I use a jig a lot. It's probably, again, kind of like I said with the jerk bait. When I go around a pond and I make like, I go around a whole pond or a whole area with the jerk bait, the second bait I might pick up as a jig, just because it's a bait that's very easy to feel the bottom with. And so you can fish it very efficiently out there, and efficiency is super key. All right, let's move on to the next bait, which is definitely a very versatile bait, even more so than you might think, and that is a lipless crankbait, just like this. Now, when it comes to fishing a lipless crankbait in the winter months, in cold water, in ponds, from the bank, when I'm fishing in a lake, I typically go with the 1/2 ounce lipless crankbait most of the time when I'm fishing, 90% of the time. When I'm fishing from the bank and I'm fishing in cold water, I like something, I think a 1/2 ounce is too much. You can definitely catch bass on it. And if you live in Texas and you have 55-degree waters or 60-degree waters in the winter, 1/2 ounce is going to be fine. But when you're dealing with really cold water, I mean upper 30s, low 40s, I like something that's just a little bit smaller. Now this particular bait right here is it's a Japanese bait. It's pretty hard to get a hold of. It's a 3/8 ounce bait. A lot of lipless crankbaits out there on the market are either 1/4 ounce or 1/2 ounce. So the 3/8 ounce size to me I really like, just because it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Like a 1/4 ounce can be a little bit difficult to cast on casting equipment, but that size, a 1/4 ounce, will get you a lot of bites. This 3/8 ounce to me is just perfect. It's the perfect all around thing. Now, when I am fishing this bait, it is just going to kind of depend on where I think the fish are. Because at times bass will be in pretty shallow water, and I will do a cast the bait out and really just kind of reel it slowly and just kind of pause that bait every now and then. So it's kind of coming horizontally through the water column. I pause it, let it drop, keep on going. You can fish it that way from 2 foot of water all the way to 5 and 6 foot of water, 7 foot of water, fairly easy. Another technique, and something that I do a lot in cold water, is simply yo-yo this thing off the bottom. It is very similar to the way that you would fish a blade bait. We've talked about blade baits before, and a blade bait is a very effective way of catching bass. This is the exact same thing really as a blade bait, but I just fish this a little bit more in ponds than I do a blade bait, because to me, a blade bait really excels, especially when you're fishing like super deep water, where you can, there's a lot of times where I'm fishing, 25, 35, 45, 50 foot of water. And those blade baits really excel then. When I'm fishing a little bit shallow water, I like a lipless crankbait, but I'm pretty much doing the same thing with them. I'm casting them out, letting them hit the bottom, yo-yoing up, letting it fall down. And you can kind of continue that retrieve all the way back to you. So this is a really, really fun way to catch fish during this time of the year. It's another way of really efficiently covering water. And it's just a great technique. Now, when it comes to colors, you guys will see somewhat of a theme. I like gold in ponds. I always have. I grew up on a pond, and in the winter especially, I even think gold was even a little bit better. And again, it's kind of because of that bluegill. But there's some ponds out there that have golden shiners in them, or other small bait fish. I just like it. It catches a lot of fish. Now, as far as the rod goes, this is my favorite crankbait rod of all time, which I throw a lot of my lipless crankbaits on, which is the Arc Tharp Series grinder rod. So these are all Tharp Series rods. I didn't even realize that when I initially picked them up, but these are all Tharp Series rods. I really like the Tharp Series rods. This is a composite rod, meaning it's half fiberglass, half graphite. It has that parabolic bend that I like with, treble hooked hard baits. I'm going to use this on 12-pound test. And I'm going to, honestly, I could probably fish this specific bait on my jerkbait rod. I wouldn't want to fish a jerkbait on this rod, but I wouldn't mind fishing a 1/4 ounce or maybe a 3/8 ounce lipless on that jerkbait rod that I just brought up. But again, I wouldn't use this rod for a jerkbait. I would obviously use that rod for a jerkbait. So I could honestly throw this lipless on that rod and only have 3 rods. So as a bank angler, that is something to keep in mind. Again, parabolic bending rod, medium action, is kind of where I like to be. 12-pound fluorocarbon. This is I believe a 6.4. Yeah, this is a 6.4 to 1 gear ratio reel. I like that pretty much for all my cranking. It's a little bit on the slower end, which really it used to be like medium, but then they kept making reels that got faster and faster, and now a 6 point something seems slow. But anyways, I like a little bit slower. Just again, cold water. There are times where I'm using the reel to bring that bait in, and I want it coming at a slower pace. So that's really the setup and how and where I like to fish a lipless crankbait. Now the last bait is the one that I have talked about a little bit here recently on the channel, and it's a jig head minnow. I'm never going to stop talking about how effective a jig head minnow is for pond fish or bank anglers, because a lot of guys are going to talk about this bait in relationship to using your forward-facing sonar. If you're fishing from the bank, most people do not have any kind of forward-facing sonar. I'm sure there are some guys out there using it from the bank. But I have used this bait in cold water and caught the crap out of them with forward-facing sonar. Now, the only time that I've really documented it is in a Bass Fishing HQ video that I'm going to leave link right up here. So in that video, I kind of go through this setup standard rod, 7-foot, medium, fast action style rod. I go through pretty much all these baits in that particular video, but it's on the water. So if you guys prefer the on the water stuff, click right up here to watch that one next. Also, don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear, and I will see you guys tomorrow.